3 days, 2 games, 1 rival. And by the time it was over, the record books had a new name written into them. Caitlin Clark was sitting on the bench staring at a scoreline she couldn't fix, and the Indiana Fever were walking out of Atlanta with a problem they can no longer pretend isn't there. This wasn't a bad night. A bad night is a missed buzzer beater or a cold shooting streak. What happened to the Fever in Atlanta was something else entirely, and the number at the center of it is one this franchise is going to be answering questions about for the rest of the season. Let's start where it actually started, because most people only saw the ending. The Atlanta Dream and the Indiana Fever didn't just play one game, they played a home-and-home, 2 matchups in the span of 72 hours, the kind of back-to-back that turns a regular season afternoon into something personal. The first one happened on a Thursday night in Indiana, on Clark's home floor in front of her own crowd, and it slipped away from the Fever, 108-107. That alone would have been a story, but it wasn't the score that people were talking about the next morning. It was a single moment in the second quarter, with the Dream clinging to a narrow lead when an official blew the whistle and called Angel Reese for a foul on Clark. Reese's reaction said everything. First came the disbelief, the wide-eyed look of a player who couldn't believe the call. Then came the mockery, a pointed little bit of theater aimed directly at Clark, the kind of thing that reminds everyone watching that these two have a history that goes back years and shows no sign of cooling off. The clip spread overnight, and it set the table for what came next. What made it land so hard was the timing. This all happened while the sports world's attention was pointed somewhere else entirely. The NBA Finals had just wrapped, the World Cup was in full swing on North American soil, and yet by Friday morning, fans woke up to the realization that this 3-year-old feud between Reese and Clark was very much still alive, still capable of hijacking the conversation, still the most reliable lightning rod in women's basketball. It didn't need a grand stage. A single foul call and a single reaction were enough. That's how charged this thing is. Light the smallest spark and the whole internet catches fire. Because the two teams weren't done with each other. Not even close. Saturday afternoon, the rematch. Same 2 teams, new building, this time inside State Farm Arena in Atlanta, the home of the NBA's Hawks, in front of a sold-out crowd of more than 17,000 people. The Dream don't usually play there. Their regular home seats about 5,000. This was a showcase, a marquee date circled on the calendar, and Atlanta treated it like one. What unfolded over the next 2 hours wasn't just a win. It was the single best offensive performance in the history of the franchise, and it buried Indiana. The final score was 113-96. And that 113 isn't a typo or an outlier, it's a franchise record. In the entire history of the Atlanta Dream, no team wearing that jersey had ever scored more points in a single game. They didn't do it with one player going supernova either, which is what makes it so damning for the Fever. They did it with everybody. All 5 Atlanta starters reached double figures. Not 3 of them, not 4, all 5. Rhyne Howard led the way with 24 points, knocking down 4 threes and carrying the scoring load. Alicia Gray was right behind her with 22, hitting 9 of her 18 shots from the floor. Naz Hillman chipped in 19 off the strength of the Dream's interior dominance. And then there was Jordan Canada, who didn't just score, she orchestrated. Canada finished 1 rebound shy of a triple-double, stuffing the box score with 12 points, 12 assists, 7 rebounds, and 3 steals. When your point guard is putting up numbers like that against you, it usually means the floor was wide open all night. It was. But here's the thing about that 113. As historic as it wasn't even the most historic thing that happened on the floor that afternoon. That belonged to Angel Reese. Somewhere in the middle of all those Atlanta baskets, Reese pulled down a rebound. Nothing flashy, just one more board on a night full of them. But it was the one that mattered. With that single rebound, she became the fastest player in the history of the WNBA to reach 1,000 career rebounds. The fastest ever. She got there in fewer games than anyone who has ever played in the league, faster than legends who spent their entire careers chasing numbers like that. To put a name on what she just beat, the previous record belonged to Tina Charles, one of the most decorated rebounders the league has ever produced, who needed 89 games to reach 1,000 boards. Reese got there in her 70s. She didn't just break the record, she demolished the margin. Reese finished the day with 18 points and 8 rebounds, a quietly enormous line, and walked off the floor having stamped her name into a record that may stand for a long, long time.
And of all the people in the world for her to do it against, she did it against Caitlin Clark. You have to understand what that means, because the two of them have been linked since before either ever played a professional minute. It goes back to the 2023 College National Championship, when Reese's LSU team beat Clark's Iowa team, and Reese delivered a taunt that launched 1,000 arguments. The two of them had actually crossed paths even earlier than that, all the way back on the youth circuit as teenagers, but it was that national title game that turned a matchup into a phenomenon. The next year came the rematch, a record-setting television event where Clark's Iowa got its revenge in front of an audience that shattered viewership numbers for women's basketball. By the time they both arrived in the WNBA in 2024, Clark as the can't-miss #1 overall pick, Lanny a few spots later, the rivalry was already the engine pulling the entire sport into the mainstream. Pundits started comparing it to Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, two stars whose personal contrast made their whole league must-see television. And it has never been simple. Almost from the first WNBA meeting, the storyline spilled past basketball. There was a hard foul in their rookie year that became a national argument. There was another the following season. Commentators have spent years dissecting not just how these two play, but what they represent, with the racial undertones of how each player is treated by fans and media becoming its own widely discussed topic, one that both players have, at various points, pushed back on, asking for the coverage to focus on the game. Through it all, Reese has more often been cast as the antagonist, a role she's openly said she's willing to play if it helps her team. Clark has tended to downplay the drama, but the result is the same. Every time these teams share a floor, the temperature in the building is different than for any other game on the schedule. They've insisted over and over that it isn't personal, that the hatred fans project onto them is something the media built and not something they actually feel. "We're not best friends by any means," Reese once said, "but we're very respectful of one another." But respect doesn't dull a rivalry like this. If anything, it sharpens it. So when Reese set a league record on the same floor where Clark was being outplayed, in the second of 2 straight wins over Clark's team, the symbolism wrote itself. And that's what made what happened to Clark sting even more. Because Clark did not play badly. Let's be clear about that up front, since the easy version of this story is to point at the losing team's star and assume she struggled. She didn't. She finished with 26 points, a team high, on a genuinely efficient 11 of 18 from the floor, including 3 made threes. She added 7 assists. By the raw numbers, it was a strong individual game. But the raw numbers hide the strangest part of the night, which is that Clark essentially played 2 completely different games inside the same 40 minutes. In the first quarter, she was unstoppable. She poured in 13 points, hit her first 3 shots from beyond the arc, committed 0 turnovers, and when the buzzer sounded on the opening period, the plus-minus told a clean story. She was a +7, meaning the Fever were comfortably ahead during her minutes. For those first 10 minutes, this looked like Clark's game to steal. Then the rest of the game happened, and it was a different universe. Over the remaining 3 quarters, Clark scored another 13 points, same output, but it took 3 times as long to get there. She also committed 7 turnovers in that stretch, 7, and her plus-minus for everything after that first quarter cratered all the way down to a -26. Read those 2 numbers next to each other and let them sink in. +7 in the first quarter, -26 the rest of the way.
That is not the line of a player who got tired or lost her touch. That is the line of a player whose entire surrounding environment fell apart around her while she was still trying to hold it together. The 7 turnovers deserve an honest look because they're real and they matter. 7 giveaways from your primary ball handler is a number that loses games, full stop, and it's well above what Clark normally produces. But context is everything here. She was firing passes to teammates who weren't where they needed to be. She was kicking the ball out to shooters drifting out of position. And she wasn't alone in the sloppiness. As a team, the Fever turned the ball over 19 times. Atlanta turned it over 8. 19-8. You will not beat a competent professional team giving away the ball 19 times, no matter who your franchise player is, and no matter how many points she scores. Clark's 7 were a piece of a much bigger collective unraveling. Which raises the uncomfortable question Fever fans have started asking out loud. If it's not Clark, then what exactly is broken? Start with the glass, because that's where this game was physically lost. The Fever grabbed 4 offensive rebounds the entire game. 4. Atlanta, meanwhile, dominated the boards on both ends and turned those extra possessions into a flood of second-chance points and easy looks. Atlanta outscored Indiana in the paint by a wide margin and bullied them on the offensive glass, with Reese in the middle of all of it. When you can't rebound, you can't get stops. And when you can't get stops, you watch a team set a franchise scoring record against you. The 4 offensive rebound stat and the 113 points allowed stat are not 2 separate problems. They are the same problem wearing 2 different jerseys. Then there's the foul trouble, which has become a recurring Fever nightmare. Aaliyah Boston, the team's starting center and one of its best players, picked up her 5th foul late in the 3rd quarter. That's the kind of foul trouble that effectively ends a player's night as a difference maker, because she has to play tentative the rest of the way or risk fouling out completely. And here's the part that turns a bad break into a structural flaw. When Boston goes to the bench in foul trouble, Indiana has almost nothing behind her. The front court depth simply isn't there. The offseason was supposed to address exactly this. The Fever brought in versatile forwards, names like Monique Billings and Maisha Hins-Allen, specifically to give themselves a real interior backup plan. But on nights like this, when Boston is compromised and Atlanta is hammering the glass, that depth hasn't shown up the way the front office hoped it would. The team gets exposed inside, and there's no answer on the bench. It's worth pausing on that foul, too, because it became its own talking point. The whistle was busy all afternoon. Atlanta got to the free throw line repeatedly, including on plays where the contact looked minimal, and Boston's 5th came on a play that the coaching staff could have chosen to challenge and didn't. In a game that was still within reach at that moment, losing your starting center to the bench without even contesting the call is the kind of decision that gets relitigated for days afterward. Whether a challenge would have changed anything, nobody can say. But it's the type of small hinge moment that, in a loss this lopsided, fans seize on as a symbol of a larger pattern. There's a defensive wrinkle here that doesn't get talked about enough either. For much of the season, opponents have made a deliberate strategy out of attacking Clark on the defensive end, hunting her in isolation, forcing her to guard in space possession after possession. When a team can target your franchise player defensively and also overwhelm your front court on the glass, it puts the entire defense in a vice. That's part of what Atlanta did. They didn't just out-talent Indiana. They found the pressure points and leaned on every single one of them until the whole structure buckled. It wasn't all bleaks, to be fair. Kelsey Mitchell gave Indiana a real second scoring option with 16 points and was a big reason the Fever even led at halftime. Boston, before her foul trouble swallowed her night, managed 13 points and 9 rebounds in limited minutes. Sophie Cunningham added 13 of her own. The Fever actually shot the ball beautifully in the first half. They led 59-56 at the break, shooting above 60% from the floor. For 20 minutes, this looked like a game they could win. And then the 3rd quarter arrived and the whole thing collapsed. Atlanta outscored Indiana 28-15 in that single quarter, flipping a 3-point halftime deficit into a double-digit lead they never relinquished. The Fever scored just 15 points in an entire quarter, a number that should simply not be possible for a team with this much offensive talent. They looked lost. The crisp, confident team from the first half was gone, replaced by a group that couldn't get a stop, couldn't secure a rebound, and couldn't string together clean possessions on offense. By the time the fourth quarter started, the game was already decided.
What makes the collapse so jarring is that just a couple of weeks earlier, the story around this team was the exact opposite. The Fever had pulled themselves together after a rough start, reportedly held a players-only meeting, and responded with a 5-1 stretch where the defense actually clicked. At one point, one of the better defensive months in the league. They had even handled this very same Atlanta team earlier in the season, beating the Dream by double digits in a game that was a season low in points allowed for Indiana. Go back a little further, and the Fever were the team that upset the Dream in the first round of the 2025 playoffs, then pushed the eventual champions to a deciding game in the next round, all of it short-handed. This is not a franchise that doesn't know how to compete. That's what makes 2 straight blowout-flavored losses to Atlanta, capped by a franchise record going up on the scoreboard against them, feel less like a slump and more like a warning. The team that showed up in the first half on Saturday is the team Indiana believes it is. The team that showed up in the third quarter is the one that keeps costing them. So where does that leave the people in charge? This is where the conversation gets pointed, and it's worth being careful about how we frame it, because there's a difference between what's fact and what's debate. The facts are these. The Fever allowed a franchise record 113 points, gave up 4 offensive rebounds, turned the ball over 19 times, and have now lost 2 straight to the same opponent in the span of 3 days. At 9-7, they're hovering around the 7th spot in the playoff seeding, despite rostering one of the most talked-about players on the planet. Those things are not in dispute. What is being debated, and it's a debate happening loudly across sports media and Fever message boards right now, is who's accountable for it. A lot of fans and analysts are pointing at the bench, at head coach Stephanie White, asking why a team with this kind of talent keeps surrendering 100 games and keeps unraveling after halftime. It's a fair question to raise. It's also worth keeping honest. White is not some defensive specialist who failed at her one job, the way some of the angrier takes online have framed it. She's a former Coach of the Year, an Indiana franchise legend who played for and coached this team before, and she was actually known in Connecticut for modernizing the offense, not for being a defensive guru. She inherited a roster that already ranked near the bottom of the league defensively. So the criticism that the defense still isn't fixed is legitimate. The version of that criticism that pretends she was hired to do one simple thing and flopped is not telling the whole story. The roster questions land on the front office, on general manager Amber Cox and the group that built this team. They had resources this offseason. They made moves specifically to shore up the front court and add depth. And right now, on the evidence of games like this one, those moves haven't solved the problem they were meant to solve. Whether that's bad luck, a slow start from new additions, or a genuine miscalculation is exactly the kind of thing that gets argued about for an entire season. Reports and analysts are raising it. Nobody can say for certain how it resolves, but the question is on the table, and games like Saturday's are why. Here's the part nobody on either side of that argument can wave away, though. Pull all the way back and look at the shape of this thing. You have a rivalry that's been running for years between 2 players whose every meeting becomes a national event. And in the latest chapter, one of them just became the fastest player in league history to reach 1,000 rebounds on her home floor in front of a sold-out crowd in the second of 2 straight wins over the other. Meanwhile, the other, the generational talent, the franchise player everything is supposed to be built around, posted 26 points and 7 assists, and still walked off a -26 for most of the night because the team around her couldn't rebound, couldn't hold on to the ball, and couldn't get a single stop when it mattered. That's the real story Atlanta wrote on Saturday, not just a record-breaking score, though that's in the books forever now. The bigger story is the gap
The gap between a dream team that's surging, sitting near the top of the league, winning 9 of its last 12, and a fever team that beats the opponents it's supposed to beat and falls apart against the ones that punch back. The gap between a rival who's collecting milestones and a star who's collecting frustration. The franchise record 113 on the scoreboard is the headline, but the question underneath it, whether Indiana can fix what's broken before the season slips away, or whether Caitlin Clark is going to spend her prime watching other people make history against her, that's the one that's going to hang over this team every single night until somebody answers it. And the schedule isn't about to do them any favors. The road ahead is loaded, more meetings with the league's best, more nights where the margin for error shrinks to nothing. The Fever don't get to ease back into form against soft competition. They head home next, but the stretch in front of them is exactly the kind that separates real contenders from teams that only look the part on their good nights. Every one of those games is now a referendum on whether Saturday was a bad afternoon or a true picture of who this team is. And right now, nobody in Indiana has.